Good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Libby Moeller and I'm the editorial coordinator for our reporting fellowship program here at the Pulitzer Center. As we wait for more folks to join us, please let us know in the chat where you're listening in from. If you haven't joined us before, the Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit journalism and education organization. We support more than 170 reporting projects each year in collaboration with news outlets around the world. Then work with classrooms in our mission to elevate public engagement with these issues. While we are based in Washington, D.C., our staff and work are global. Today, you'll be watching 3 films produced through our reporting fellowship program. We facilitate these fellowships with our more than 40 campus consortium university partners located in the US, Canada, and Qatar. This year, we welcomed 53 new reporting fellows to our 2022 cohort. Now I'll share a few logistics before we begin our film screenings. You'll see a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. You can begin adding your questions for our filmmakers at any time throughout the screenings of our 3 films. Following the screenings, we will have time for audience questions, so be sure to stay on the webinar. There's also a chat icon on your screen, and we would appreciate it if you use the chat box for any specific tech issues you might run into. One other note, please do stay on a bit longer once our session ends to be part of a brief survey. Now I'd like to briefly introduce today's filmmakers who are joining us. Kyle Cristello is the director of Unfinished Business and our 2021 reporting fellow from Westchester Community College. Jessica Marcy is one of the co-directors of Broken Land and one of our 2021 American University Reporting Fellows. Amelia Tyson is the other co-director of Broken Land and another fellow from 2021 at American University. And finally, Josee Molavi is the director of I Am the Land and our 2020 fellow from American University. So we're now going to get started with our 3 film screenings, which have a total runtime of about 40 minutes. We'll return here after the screenings for a Q&A with our filmmakers, so do stay tuned and please enjoy the films. Oh, thank you everyone for watching. I first just want to give a quick hand to all of our filmmakers. I loved seeing those films again, even though I've seen them once or twice before. I'm just gonna get right into this Q&A section. Before I start though, I'll add that if you do have a question, please type it into our Q&A box if you can, and that way we'll be able to field all of your questions that you might have. But I wanted to start off first with a question for you, Josee, as we just wrapped up your film. So as an island that is, incredibly susceptible and vulnerable to the effects of climate change, I think we all know there are endless angles through which you can probably cover the climate crisis as it relates to Puerto Rico. So I was hoping you could share a little bit about your decision to tell this story specifically through spotlighting the Taino people and highlighting their voices in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, you can look at this story from a multitude of lenses, as you mentioned, and there's a lot of different perspectives, both on and off the island. I think even among the Taino community, right? It's not a monolith by any means, and so I chose to take this angle, I guess, on the climate crisis because when I started speaking with people in the Taino community who were really great enough to let me into kind of their world and talk to me a little bit about what was going on the island and off the island and what their experiences were, I realized that as somebody who had visited the island before and sort of known colloquially about the island, I had no idea that there was an indigenous community with such heritage and such roots that was still there. And I think a lot of people, because the colonization of the island made this myth that the Taino peoples were extinct, a lot of people live on with that in their minds, and it's really cemented. So when I found out that there was sort of this kind of history to Puerto Rico that is considered history and not a living present, once I came face to face with amazing people and amazing stories who really know how to combat these issues and know how to go about stewarding their island based on, all these hundreds of years of history of being there, I thought it would be really interesting to kind of get that angle on it, just because I had not heard much about the situation from, I guess, their perspective. And what happened was I was drawn into this beautiful world of culture and language and food and music and a lot of different really cool stuff, and made a lot of really cool friends along the way. So this angle is important because a lot of people still think that the Taino peoples are extinct, which is not true at all. So I hope that people can take away from this that there's a lot more to the island than just one story.
And I think that point was really clearly made in your film. It was just fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to pivot to Kyle next, to our first film, Unfinished Business. And the question I was thinking of also touches, I think, on a similar note of a question we just got from one of our audience members. So Kyle, one of the things that I appreciate most about your film is how it's both a very moving tribute to Bolivar Cedeno's life, but it's also a story of joy as family, as reconnecting with family tradition. And I also think it's a story that a lot of people can probably relate to in these past few years of COVID-19 and losing loved ones. So I'd love to know what made you want to depict this particular story in this specific way during these COVID times.
Brilliant question, Libby. So I would say the inspiration for this project actually came from a tragedy in my family as well. During March 2020, unfortunately lost the matriarch of my family, Isabel Kavanaugh, and that was during a tough time during COVID. It was very hard for my family and I to, celebrate and mourn this death properly. And in July 2020, one of my closest friends, Iron, as we know, lost Bolivar Cedeno as well. And he kind of served as the patriarch and backbone of that family. And, I experienced it a couple months before, and now one of my close friends is starting to experience it as well. So I'm starting to realize that this is more of a problem for other families. And in spring of 2021, came up with the idea to make a documentary piece about my grandmother and the story of how things happened with her, and or by interviewing 3 close family members. And during that time, I came up with the idea and story for approaching this through Iron's eyes, similar topic and whatnot, with the intention that the finished product would, have people that experience loss over these past couple of years, especially significant loss in the family, could relate to and find closure through. So that was the goal with Iron and his family, and that's the goal for anyone that watches it, hopefully. So
I, for one, think your personal experience definitely informed how you made that film. And as someone who has also lost a loved one throughout COVID, I found myself really relating to it too. So Thank you for that answer. I am going to ask a question or two more, and then I promise I'll pivot to our audience questions. But Amelia and Jessica, I want to turn to you now, or to both of you, because when the two of you pitched this project to the Pulitzer Center, but also to American University, you had to fulfill a few requirements of your university, which included finding a story that included climate change, religion, faith, and also climate-influenced migration. A lot of boxes to tick. So I'd love to know, what was your experience like weaving all three of those elements and even additional elements together for that final film?
Do you want to take that, Amelia?
Oh, we can't hear you for some reason, Amelia.
I can also start, and
maybe
then
Jessica. Oh, sorry about that. I promise we heard her earlier.
Yeah, I think, initially it's a bit of a challenge just because it requires a lot of pre-reporting, and all three of those topics are just huge topics, as I'm sure Josee knows as well, because her film was also had those constraints. But what was really helpful is that once we were in the field, we decided to focus on 32 volcanoes, and they're really an organization where they were able to kind of bring all those different elements together. So they're working on climate change and environmental issues. They're working with families whose children have left for the US and are trying to prevent migration and help people stay in the community. And then also, they didn't specifically work with religion per se, but they worked a lot with Mayan culture and really valuing indigenous culture. And so that came through a lot with like characters like Santos, who's Maya Quiche and who is a bilingual Quiche Spanish teacher. So I think, initially when we were thinking about it, it was just like so much reporting and talking to so many people. But once we got into the field and we got to Quetzaltenango, we just decided that 32 volcanoes really was the best way to tell the story, and that through that organization we could find characters that were really strong, and we could also connect all those different issues. And of course, like there's much more to say about religion or any one of those three topics, but the way we approached it was to try to weave it all together in a manageable way.
Thank you, Jessica. Amelia, I don't know if you want to try one more time.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah. Loud and clear.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think one other thing is that because 32 volcanoes is embedded in the community life, we were able to kind of see how all three of those topics connected through their eyes, kind of through their lens and through their experience, and not kind of viewing it from an outsider's perspective. And that to see that actually that is the reality, is that those three are connected. And on the one hand, I think in some of our research, there was some conversation that perhaps it's not going to be very clear to people that climate change affects migration, affects forced migration, or is a factor that is motivating people to migrate, in part because people don't really use the term climate change. It's just the land is ill, is not well. And so to be able to kind of have these conversations with these friends and understand from their perspective how their spiritual values, their religious system influences the decisions to stay or to leave, how those systems also help them to think about how they should combat what is happening to the land. It really is like fundamentally how the story had to be told, because it wouldn't have been accurate without all three of those components, because that is the reality of the lived experience of those people.
Thank you for breaking that down for us. I will now turn to a couple of audience questions that we've received. So Josee, I'm gonna pivot back to you here with a question from one of our new reporting fellows, actually. And that question is, how did you learn about the Taino community's efforts for climate justice? And did you get in touch with the community? Were they immediately willing to be featured in your documentary? Can you describe the general process of connecting with your sources?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know how many of you watching are fellow journalists or filmmakers or anything, but sometimes you get connected to people through very weird situations or very kind of spontaneous situations. And honestly, I was sitting in my bedroom in the spring of 2020, waiting to graduate virtually. And I heard about the fellowship, and I was, sort of excited to apply. I didn't have an idea yet, but I was just doing a lot of poking around 3 tenants that Amelia and Jessica have sort of talked about, because we came from the same university, the same grant. So climate change, migration, and religion, right? And immediately I sort of thought, like, well, why don't I bend religion a little bit? Because I'm really interested in understanding, spirituality and just sort of how that aspect of Latin American culture, the spirituality that a lot of different indigenous tribes, indigenous peoples bring, has really defined a lot of the way they view nature. And so I started thinking about that. The gears are turning, and I saw an article in, I think it was like a Smithsonian article or something, and they were talking about the Taino peoples, and there was a person quoted in it, and he had said that a lot of the Taino elders predicted or foresaw Hurricane Maria, and that they had like a ceremony to see, if they could connect with the spirits and see what was happening and try to understand it and try to show respect. And then Hurricane Maria happened, of course, and was devastating to the island. So I looked up the person that was quoted in the article on Facebook. And I messaged him and I asked him if I could pick his brain a little bit, if he would be comfortable. And I fully did not expect him to respond. But something that I have learned about generally the people that I've met in Puerto Rico and the people of the Puerto Rican diaspora is that they're just very kind and very welcoming and very willing to share with you and very willing to be vocal about things and be advocates for themselves and sort of just make noise in general. And they're just a really vibrant people that I have met from that island, and the diaspora as well. So from that, I was led to another person, to another person, to another person, to another person, and sort of built this web of really, really interesting stories and people and experiences that were not a monolith whatsoever, as I've mentioned before. And so within that kind of context of coming to face with, different people's thoughts about the situation, I realized that I wasn't going to be able to travel to Puerto Rico for a really long time from when I got my grant because of COVID. And I didn't want to go to the island knowing that they don't have a great health infrastructure and all these things, that we're thinking about during COVID. So I spent a lot of time pre-reporting, like a year pre-reporting and trying to connect with people and further my network and just try to understand the ins and outs of this story. But it really all changed when I hit the ground. So I'll say that. And when I was on the ground in Puerto Rico, I was there for 3 months, and I met a lot of people that wanted to be a part of the story and a lot of people that didn't want to be a part of the story and a lot of people that were kind of in between. But yeah, I want to give a big shout out to Po Arani, who was one of the most helpful people that I've ever met in terms of bridging the gaps for me and teaching me and letting me into his world. And we're pretty good friends to this day. So in that case, I'll say, I reached out to someone on Facebook and an entire world opened up to me. And that's why I love journalism so much, because that really happens often, I'm coming to know. So thanks for the question.
Hopefully our new reporting fellows in the audience are taking notes on these good tips that Josee has just shared. So thank you, Josee. Okay, Kyle, I have a question for you from our audience. which is how long did it take for you to shoot your documentary, but also how did you gain that level of access to your subject? I know you've already spoken about, this was a friend of yours, and this kind of ties in with a question that I had as well, which was, how did you go about navigating, and what did it mean to you to make a film about a close friend of yours?
Both great questions. So I had, or the majority of the film, like during pre-production, was somewhat planned. I would say the scene at the graveyard, the memorial scene at the end, all those were planned to be filmed. So I would say outside of filming at the Dominican Republic, I produced for about 4 days, and then we were scheduled to be in the Dominican Republic from July 12th to July 18th. And that's all the time I had to film there. And once I landed, everything I knew about planning for this documentary just flew out the window. I kind of just went along as everything, kind of went. But I would say I gained access to this story, and I'm forever thankful for Iron and his family to, accept me with open arms. But yeah, Aaron's been a lifelong friend of mine, and our families both went through similar situations. So once I pitched the idea to him and his mother, of course, I needed permission from her and his family that lives in the Dominican Republic. So once I received permission, that's when we started. And once I landed in the Dominican Republic, Morena and Tao, who are Iron's and Bolivar's relatives, accepted me with open arms and saw me as family as well. So every time I was around them outside of the documentary or off camera, it was beautiful. But yeah, to make this film, as a friend, I really see Iron as family at this point. And it was just so beautiful because not only was it a journey for both of us, but for his family and his family in the Dominican Republic. Iron was exploring uncharted territory. He was aiming to discover his roots and his father's heritage, as well as me. I've never been to the Dominican Republic, and it was very much a collaborative effort at that point. Even though I came in as the filmmaker, Iron and his family helped out so much, and it wouldn't have been possible without them. So.
Thank you, Kyle. On the topic of access to subjects and sources, Jessica and Amelia, I have another question for you. Your film begins pretty much immediately with a really emotionally powerful scene as Maria Luisa is telling us about the migration of her daughter, Roxana, how she misses her so much, which sets the stage for one of the central focuses of your film, that young people are leaving this community in Guatemala. I was interested to know how, as filmmakers from outside of that community, you went about building trust with your sources so that they were willing to open up to you like that. Anything you can share about that?
You want to go ahead or?
Sure, I can start. I think, as we mentioned before, our relationship with 32 Volcanoes and Carmen and Santos and a lot of the leaders there was really pivotal in helping us connect with people and really develop those close relationships. And we really lent on them to offer us advice and to kind of guide us about who we should connect to. And then with Doña Luisa in particular, we spent a lot of time at her house. There was another woman named Iris who also works at 32 Volcanoes who really helped in the process. She's also Mayan mom, so she spoke the same indigenous language as Doña Luisa. And I think Amelia and I just really took our time and tried to put her at ease and make her comfortable. There were definitely times in that interview that became very emotional, and there were also times where she wasn't comfortable going into some pretty emotional and sensitive details. So we really just gave her the space to tell us, what she was comfortable with and what she wasn't. And also with her story in particular, we had thought about following her daughter in Los Angeles, and seeing the story from both the Guatemala side, from the mother's side, and then from the daughter's side in Los Angeles. And in the end, both the mother and daughter weren't comfortable with that. So I think it was just a lot of like respecting what they wanted, and not pushing where it wasn't appropriate. Amelia, do you want to add some more?
Yeah, I mean, I think you really touched on the main things. I mean, I think one of the really biggest ones was being there. We kind of set up camp for 3 weeks, and spent a lot of time with those who work in 32 Volcanoes, letting them get to know us, kind of having sessions where we talk back and forth about what it was that we were doing. And that, as Jessica said, that's how it facilitated kind of with Doña Luisa and a few others kind of in the community. I think because also the angle and the orientation of what it was that we were kind of trying to report on, that also built trust, that we were trying to understand from their perspective what it was that was leading to migration, and kind of how these factors of religion or spirituality and the climate and what was happening influenced these decisions. And I think because we were also so open with them and let them befriend us, then just kind of sitting back and waiting a little bit, it allowed them to kind of lead that relationship. So I think that was one of the best ways, I think, in which we were able to build that relationship.
Yeah, and I'll just add one other thing. What was really clear when we were in the ground is just what a personal issue immigration is, how it touches families and individuals and, mothers and children so directly. And so we just really explained that clearly to the people at 32 Volcanoes, which they also understand on a very deep and personal level. And so I think that that by explaining why it's important to have that personal perspective, they then were able to connect us to people and help facilitate that.
Thank you both. And I think all of you filmmakers, it was clear through your final products that you did build that trust, you did make those connections, and I'm sure that was very intentional and probably difficult to do at times. So just wanted to commend each of you on that. I'm gonna take a quick second to answer a logistical question, which is, can we watch these films again? And the answer is yes, you can definitely watch them again anytime you like. Broken Land and Unfinished Business are available right now on the Pulitzer Center website, and Josee's film I Am the Land is going to be available sometime in the coming weeks or months, we think, but it will be there eventually. Still working on that. And speaking of Josee, there's another question for you here in the chat. And one audience member is hoping to know, what was the turning point at the beach for why the developers ended up stopping? Was there a lawsuit involved? Was it intense community pressure or something else?
So being at the beach, Playa Almendros is a beach in Rincon, Puerto Rico, where I spent a lot of time, and there's a lot of stuff in the film. It's a very complicated situation. You just walk into this camp where people have been camping for months, and they have the whole thing set up. They have so much food, they have so much water, they have everything anyone would need. They're so taking care of everyone, and they had this big presence there that was kind of just like well known throughout the island, that this was happening off and on the island, that these kind of protesters, community members, demonstrators, people, you know, of all ages, of all backgrounds were kind of there putting the pressure on. So as you saw in the film, these developers of this condominium basically decided that they were going to use a really old permit to say that they could build a pool on a public beach and take public land as private. And this is illegal, and it was never legal, but they kind of had the law on their side, meaning the people who enforce the law, right? And so they kind of got away with it for a while. And so in the timeline between summer of 2021 and September, there was kind of like this just clash between people. Nothing was really happening except for the protesting, and people were getting arrested for being there, and it was just a crazy thing, and they were trying to build. But then in September, the courts decided that they had to stop building, and they had to stop this whole project, and that they had to kind of halt. And there were actually 4 court decisions that sided with the people, that sided with, you know, the protesters, the defenders of the environment and of the turtle habitats there, that said, hey guys, you know, the condominium builders, you guys need to stop this. And actually you need to demolish and restore the beach immediately within 180 days. But, you know, that's pretty immediate given public policy and courts. But anyway, so what happened is nothing. With those 180 days, they did nothing. They basically said, well, we're not going to do anything. And the protesters, you know, kept their presence there, and they put the pressure on, and they were waiting for them to demolish this and, you know, obey the law, and they didn't. And when they didn't do it within 180 days, the people decided, as you saw spray painted on the wall there, 4th of July was going to be demolition day. They just decided, okay, well, if you don't want to do it, we'll bring our, you know, chainsaws from home and our stuff like that you saw in, you know, our pickaxes and our flip-flops and everything, and we'll have a 4th of July where we're celebrating real liberation. So that's what happened. They came on July 3rd, and someone got arrested the morning of July 3rd. In the middle of the night, there's video of it online. She got arrested for just walking on the beach, and people started to get really angry and really upset, and so the tensions were rising that day, like really, really rising. And I decided to go back to Puerto Rico about a week earlier when I heard about this happening, and I went back, and I wasn't going to go to the beach until the 4th, but then I heard that things were happening on the 3rd, so I was like, I got to get there. And I got there, and I spent the whole day there, and the tensions were high, but there was always drums playing, you know, everybody's hanging out. And then around 3-4 p.m., the tides just completely changed. And the police, the 85 police that had been there protecting this illegal demonstration, where they're taking this public land, they just gave they told the kind of leader of the group to come over. They kind of whispered it in his ear, and everybody was looking. And then he just took the megaphone and said, okay, they're going to remove the barriers. And then bam, all the people came in without any organization or anything. They just started taking stuff down, building everything. And it was like a well-oiled machine. So yeah, that's kind of what happened. It was like really weird. And they're still fighting this fight, right? The wall is not already all the way down. So this is an ongoing fight. But it was like the cognitive dissonance was so strong. And then just in a moment, it was like party, you know, everybody was like, yay, woo. So it was a very complicated and confusing story. But thanks for asking that question, Emma. See, that was Emma that asked that question, so thank you. Yeah, it was a crazy situation, but really, really interesting to be there, and honestly one of the life-changing moments that you see through the lens of a camera that you'll never forget.
Thanks, Josee, and I'm glad you were able to get back to Puerto Rico and cover that. As everyone could probably tell, that was only about 2 weeks ago, so it was a really quick turnaround to get this included in your film, but I'm so glad that it was. So we're getting nearing the end of our time. I did want to ask at least one more question of all of our filmmakers we have here. And that is, so in all of your films, the characters, the communities that you're covering are confronting some very significant challenges, whether we're thinking of environmental damage, climate crisis, death, etc. And I'd love to know from all of you what you would like viewers to know or understand about how the characters and communities in your films are responding to those challenges. Anything you want to leave our audience with today. And maybe Amelia or Jessica, you could get us started on that one.
Sure. Yeah, what are our, we can call them our friends now because we befriended them. They are, I think maybe, I hope it was evident in our film and similar to in Josee's film. They are, that is their life. They're like, that is the life's work, is to try to build a dynamic in their community that people want to stay. There was a conversation definitely among the local Quetzaltenango citizens who work for 32 Volcanoes about this sort of like, there's still such a strong pull for this American dream, this vision of what life would be like in the US. And it's not just about earning money, but it's a kind of a status symbol. And that was very evident, not only in the story of Roxana about what she wanted to do and what she had her hopes for her future, but just that is not something that they see, that's a lot of the young people see in their community. And so I think the folks at 32 Volcanoes, I think even Doña Luisa and her relationship with 32 Volcanoes, that is their whole center focus, is that they want to renew. I mean, Carmen says it so beautifully in the film, that it's not a revolution, it's a renaissance. It's a rebirth of the reality of who they are. They're the nobility, the inherent like unbounded capacity of these people. And we interviewed also the mayor of Quetzaltenango, and he told us a story about how the city was one with its history of like literature, and so it's this kind of this sense of trying to find its feet now among, like, while all these other forces are working against it, to really show what and who it is, who the community is, who Guatemala is, like who are the people there. And so they're not, backing down from the fight. They're going on. They're working also. 32 Volcanoes is working with such a shoestring budget, and yet raising the capacity of so many people through this educational process. So it's so inspiring, and we only wish, I think, probably Jessica and I share this, we only wish that we could do even more to influence kind of at such a higher level policy in the US and around the world to shift the way in which countries relate, which is how you see what happens on the ground. This kind of detriment to the land, the destruction of the family life, the tearing away of like these beautiful signs of culture and life in the community. And part of it is the way that at the national level countries relate to each other. So yeah, and Jessica, do you have any thoughts too?
No, I think you captured it really well. I would just add that some things that were not in the film were just how intense things were when we were down there. There was a lot of, vaccines really hadn't arrived yet. So there was a lot of fear about COVID. A lot of people were getting COVID. There was also a lot of corruption and protests going on. And so it's just like, there was really a sense of like, definitely people at 32 Volcanoes had a lot of hope and were really working hard, but they were confronting really significant issues that felt very, very intense. Another thing is just what really struck me was just how interrelated the issues were between the US and Guatemala. Almost everybody that we talked to had family that was in the US. A lot of the just business practices, political issues are deeply connected. So it just shows how interconnected all of these issues are between the US and Guatemala. And I guess with climate change and immigration, it's really just, worldwide issues that connect us all.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Kyle or Josee, feel free to go ahead.
I could go if it's fine. All right. So I kind of see my film as this point a love letter to Bolivar Cedeno and his family. And, the intention was to really connect Iron to Bolivar's closest relatives that, he didn't have the privilege to seeing throughout his life because they live in the Dominican Republic. And it's hard to connect. Morena wasn't able to travel to the States to, attend the funeral. So there is a lot of distance in between this family, but at the same time, they're very much well connected. And I feel like the purpose of this film was to, make them always feel connected, make them always remember and appreciate Bolivar for the person he was. And on a much larger scale to, as for mentioned, to have people that have struggled with similar circumstances, kind of, see hope through this or relate in some certain way and feel the raw emotion that, comes through or comes from the people in my film. So.
Thank you, Kyle. And Josee, we can end with you.
Yeah, sure. So something that I reflect on a lot is that over the course of the kind of 2 years that I've been working on this film, the multiple trips to Puerto Rico that I've made, all of the people that I've met, I think I've really changed as a person in myself, but also in my perception of the island and of the people there and of the climate justice activism that's going on there. And well, for me, seeing the activism of the Puerto Rican community and specifically people in the Taino community and all who made the victory possible at the beach in Rincon and over the course of a number of other battles that are happening right now and will continue to happen. I've never seen such determination, pride, and like just dedication to the battle, the fight, the war, whatever you want to call it, to the cause and to their island. I've never seen such pride and I've never seen such determination to protect it and preserve it and to fight for it and such grit. And I just was really inspired by that, and I hope others will be. And another thing I want to say is I would challenge a lot of people, especially from the United States, who may or may not have visited Puerto Rico, but certainly, myself included, before embarking on this project, might have had a certain view of Puerto Rico as sort of like a little sibling or like the forgotten kind of like, smaller place of the US that's kind of off to the side. I mean, Puerto Rico is an ongoing colony of the United States. It is a territory. The people of Puerto Rico don't have the same class of citizenship as people who live in the mainland US are. And that's really important because a lot of policy is dictated about Puerto Rico that doesn't include Puerto Rico. So I think it's really important to look at the island as a really diverse, really, really self-sufficient place that has a lot of stuff happening that we don't even know about as people from the US. And I would challenge people's perceptions of the island and things that they think about the island. Oh, poor Puerto Rico, so vulnerable to these storms and all this stuff. It's really, really different when you take a look and you listen to the people who are actually in these fights. And I think that is crucial in sort of my filmmaking moving forward. Is like I learned a lot from this, and I hope that other people will take away that no issue is cut and dry, and especially not an issue with such history involved. So I hope people's perception of Puerto Rico can change if it's not already sort of ignited in this way by what you've seen. And I just hope that people can sort of pay attention, because these fights are ongoing. As I mentioned, the wall's still up in Rincon. So these are real people, and they're real stories, and they're happening all the time. So tap in if you haven't already.
Thank you so much, Josee, and thank you to all of our filmmakers. I really appreciate all of your time, and personally, I'm so glad that I've been able to work with each of you and see your films come to fruition. That's been really rewarding for me. So one more round of applause to all of you. You're getting congrats in the chat as well. And thank you to our audience as well. We really appreciate all of you for joining us today. For anyone who's able, you can please consider becoming a Pulitzer Center champion to support our future work, our future reporting. And if you're interested in other Pulitzer Center events, please visit pulitzercenter.org/events. We always have webinars, virtual events being scheduled. Even if you're not in the DC area, you can still join us. And if you have time, you can please stay with us just for a couple more minutes after this webinar closes for a brief audience survey. Your feedback is very much appreciated. With that, thank you all again so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your evening or your day, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you all.
Thank you, Libby and the Pulitzer Center, and everyone who joined us, Kyle and Josee.
Yes, I loved watching your films. Thank you all.
Yeah, great job,
Thank
guys.
you. Thanks, everyone.
For the audience.
Goodbye, everyone. See ya.